the point about Trump is that he is big friends with Epstein for 15 years, but the 15 years is the wrong time frame for the Virginia Roberts Giuffre paperwork.
Yeah.
Essentially, she comes onto the scene as something like 2000, whereas Trump is thick with Epstein.
The names of dozens of people connected to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein were made public with the release of court documents. But who are they? Public figures including Prince Andrew and former US President Bill Clinton are among the associates, friends and alleged victims named in the 900 pages unsealed on the order of a judge in New York. Both the former US president and the British royal deny any knowledge of Epstein's crimes. Let's speak to John Sweeney. Now, he's the journalist behind the critically acclaimed Hunting Ghislaine podcast series. He's been looking closely at the documents and knows Ghislaine Maxwell more than many others do. John, good evening to you.
Good evening, Kate.
On the surface, then, no evidence here of any further criminal offence. So no big bombshells revealed in these documents. But what have they taught us, do you think, so far?
Well, the kind of, if I'm reaching for a Shakespeare play right now, it would be much ado about nothing. There's a problem in that if you're a journalist and you've got some of the information, some of which was leaked to the media, some of which you could work out from other bits of the documents in a kind of jigsaw way, you pretty much got the story of what was going on. That, for example, Prince Andrew was in the frame for allegedly having sex with Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who was one of these girls who was first underage when she came into Epstein's web, but was 17 when she met Prince Andrew. Then there's Bill Clinton, after he stepped down from being president. And then there's people like Stephen Hawking, a man with a great mind and a broken body, and it seems a bit of an idiot as well. And that's no surprise. There are people who can be incredibly intelligent and also foolish. That's what news.
Do we know that for sure, though, in terms of Stephen Hawking? The suggestion here is that Jeffrey Epstein asked Ghislaine Maxwell to speak to any associates or friends of Giuffre to try and get them to discount the statement that Stephen Hawking had been present at an underage sex party, I think it was. But do we know that there was any basis to those accusations in the first place?
They're accusations, and they're accusations made basically in a whole series of legal disputes between Virginia Roberts Giuffre and Ghislaine Maxwell. But it doesn't prove. It proves bad judgment by people like Stephen Hawking, but it doesn't prove anything more. There was something creepy and weird about Epstein. He was multi-millionaire. He was incredibly manipulative. He was cunning. And he was dark, and in secret, he had an obsession about having sexualized massages with underage girls, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. The point is that this is, wrong and peculiar, but it's also not common. So most of the men are in the front. So there's a big issue, and this happened. A lot of this conversation was raised first during the trial, which I attended in New York at Ghislaine Maxwell. What about the men? Why aren't the big men? Why aren't these people being on trial too? And the answer came from the FBI through various sort of sources, people talking to people who were close to them, that actually the men weren't pedophiles like Epstein was. So it's quite possible that some of these men, I name no names, may well have been having sex or mucking around, having shenanigans with 21, 22, 23-year-olds. And this is the kind of thing that Epstein supplied. But that's not a crime, and that's why the FBI didn't go there.
Yeah.
And so what you've got is a rather sad story of male folly, of a cunning man who may or may not be a blackmailer, but certainly knew how to manipulate people. And I think what Prince Andrew was doing for Epstein was a royal whitewash of Epstein's existing conviction, which he got in 2009. There's one count in Florida of having sex with an underage girl. This actually hid a multitude of sins, and this was a sweetheart deal, and it was wrong. But what Andrew did after that was essentially kind of whitewash him, and this was terrible judgment by Andrew. But it's also true to say, and there's an allegation that he had sex with Virginia Roberts Giuffre. That's what she says, and he ends up paying up a lot of money. That's the story goes, to Virginia Roberts Giuffre. But she was 17, and when they met in London, and the legal age of consent is 16. So there's no evidence of a crime.
There's no criminality there.
No.
But obviously he felt drawn to pay 11 million quid or whatever the roundabout figure was to her to make it all go away.
Yes, but that's civil. I also think, by the way, that and I don't know this. This is my what's Sunak's phrase these days? My working assumption. That there may have been people, for example, his Royal Protection Officers, coppers, who were able to say that at least some of the things he'd been saying in public, or his lawyers were saying defending him, was provably not true. And they stayed in the shadows until he actually had to cough up in the civil case. But again, this isn't evidence of criminality.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying this is good, Kate. I'm saying what the men did was wrong, morally. But it wasn't criminal.
Yeah, because there was no criminality in it. Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman, is the one who's in court.
Yes, well, she's in court because she facilitated...
In prison, sorry, in jail.
She's in prison because she facilitated this stuff on an industrial basis.
Yeah.
She created the machinery by which Epstein could have 3 or 4 sexualized massages with 14, 15-year-olds, 6-year-olds. And that was a terrible thing that she did. But there's no evidence that the men were into this particular thing like Epstein was. Yeah. There's one other twist to this, which is trafficking. So the law against trafficking is actually much tighter now in 2024 than it was back in 2001. And actually, there was, I think, something on statute, but it's very, very weak. And it didn't capture what Prince Andrew is alleged to have done with Virginia Roberts Giuffre, or her with him, so that you can't, and it's quite right, but you can't try people for laws which aren't on the statute book, which again points to what we're looking at, which is the reason why the FBI didn't charge any of these other characters, Clinton or Prince Andrew, boom, 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 boom. There are libel lawyers, aren't there? Anyway, the reason why they didn't charge them is because there were no crimes that they could
that had taken place. Let's just pick up on a couple of other elements. I'm conscious of time here. It's so fascinating hearing you talk through this. This evening, Donald Trump's family. I'm killing the story. So actually, it's a bit rubbish. I get rid of me. Donald Trump's family this evening has said, because he's only been fleetingly mentioned in those court documents relating to Jeffrey Epstein, that is definitive proof that the former president never took part in any child molestation. A lot of the conversation today.
Okay, we're so bloody hard.
Yes, yeah.
The point about Trump is that he is big friends with Epstein for 15 years, but the 15 years is the wrong time frame for the Virginia Roberts Giuffre paperwork.
Yeah.
Essentially, she comes onto the scene as something like 2000, whereas Trump is thick with Epstein the previous 15 years, and they fall out round about the turn of the millennium.
Although he does talk about going to one of Trump's casinos on a flight that is mentioned in the court documents. Can I mention one other thing to you, because we are short on time, but much of what we've heard today centres on the deposition by Joanna Soberg. She worked for Epstein for 5 years, and she's the one who said, talking about Clinton, he said at the time, Epstein said at the time that Clinton likes them young, referring to girls. Again, no evidence of any criminality, but that's just what she said in her deposition. But she's also alleged that Prince Andrew touched her breast while she was posing for a photograph with him and Virginia Giuffre at Epstein's New York townhouse. There was a spitting image puppet, and she was sat on Prince Andrew's knee, and the puppet, I think, was on his other knee. The puppet touched the breast of Giuffre, and Prince Andrew's hand touched Soberg's breast. Is that new information? Does Prince Andrew need to be worried about that at all?
He needs to be worried about his relationship with Epstein. It's not new information. For example, it was in my podcast, and also it's in my book. In my book, I actually found somebody who met Prince Andrew, who was a spitting image. One of the people involved in the spitting image, and Andrew met him and said, "Oh, that's really funny, because a friend of mine in New York presented me with my puppet, and we all had a big laugh." Now, that doesn't corroborate the sexual element of the story, but it does have what Private Eye likes to call the private eye ring of truth about a story, i.e. it's an extra piece of information. Prince Andrew, I think, has been disgraced for a long time. All this says is there is no way back for him. He remains and he should no longer have any function inside the royal family or public life. He is a disgrace. And all of the other men who palled around with Epstein, in particular, after he got his conviction for having sex with an underage girl, should hang their heads in shame. That doesn't mean they're criminals. It does mean they're foolish and stupid.
John, thank you so much for talking to us. Really, really interesting. John Sweeney is the journalist behind the critically acclaimed Hunting Gillem podcast series. There's a book as well, as you've heard. And John, we really appreciate your expertise on this. Thanks for being with us.